Okay, good evening again. Was everybody here for part one? If you weren't, ask your neighbor, they'll explain what happened. Okay, so we're going to get started with the coin toss, as we did last time. And Mr. Heroux, as the challenger, you get to call it in the air, please, if you would. Go. Call us heads, and it is tails. So, Mr. Ross, we're going to go to you.
Is that the jackpot?
For an opening statement, please. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Hello, my name is George T. Ross, and I'm your state representative. I would first like to thank the Chamber of Commerce and the Sun Chronicle for this opportunity to speak to you this evening. 2 years ago, I came before you to ask for your support and your vote. After being a ward councilor for 7 terms and many years on numerous city boards, thanks to many of you, I was elected and began my term of office at the state level. It was and is a great honor and privilege to serve you, and I'm humbled by your belief in me. Since being sworn in January of 2011, I have worked on many interesting and important issues affecting Attleboro. I have devoted a lot of time and energy to the successful passage of the bill banning bath salts, which will keep this dangerous drug off the streets and protect our children. As a freshman legislator, I am proud to say that on August 20th, 2012, the governor signed this bill into law. I was also successful in renaming the county street bridge in honor of Lynn Goodchild and Sean Nassani, who tragically lost their lives on 9/11. Additionally, an amendment which I offered to make Attleboro a gateway city was adopted unanimously by the House and passed by the Senate, but unfortunately vetoed by the governor. This amendment had the potential to unlock needed funding, resources, and tax benefits to create jobs in Attleboro. I will continue to advocate for Attleboro's eligibility in this program. With the cooperation of the Speaker's office, I was able to place the POW MIA flag in the House chambers for the very first time. And Representative Brad Jones, the minority leader, also welcomed the flag to the entrance of his office. In 2011, my Republican colleagues and I were successful in securing an initiative in the state budget which would return unused portions of the budget to cities and towns. For Attleboro, this meant over $345,000 in funding. This was a welcome return of your tax dollars, and I was proud to steer the money back to the city. Furthermore, I was pleased to deliver $1.2 million in local aid, which is an increase of funding of 12% over last year. Earlier this year, I joined my Republican colleagues embarking on a GOP jobs tour throughout the Commonwealth. Business owners and residents alike came out to offer their insight as to what we as legislators could do to bring jobs to the Commonwealth. I have spent over half my adult life in service to my city, and when re-elected, I am prepared to continue in the mindset of family values, job creation, and fiscal responsibility for your hard-earned tax dollars. I ask for your vote to keep Attleboro strong and on the right track. Thank you.
Mr. Heroux, 3 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Chamber of Commerce and all of the hosts for allowing us to have this debate. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to the audience for everybody being here. I may be new to the public spotlight, but I'm not new to Attleboro or to serving Attleboro or serving Massachusetts. Public service is something that I've been dedicating my entire adult life to. Now, I grew up here at Attleboro. I worked at my father's drugstore as a youth, and I graduated from Attleboro High School. After I graduated from Attleboro High School, I started off at community college, got some good grades, worked my way up, eventually graduated from the University of Southern California, graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a master's in criminology, I graduated from London School of Economics, and I graduated from the Harvard School of Government with a master's in public administration. I owe a lot of money for my education at its present. Now, what have I done with all this education? Well, I've done a lot. I worked with Attleboro youth and families here for 7 years between 1996 and 2003. There were times when I went to school in California, and I would work at the Attleboro YMCA on my summer breaks and Christmas breaks, but I always came back to Attleboro to work with Attleboro families and children. After that, I worked in Saudi Arabia for a little while, private sector, teaching English at the Al Rajhi Bank. And then when I came home, I worked for the Philadelphia jail system, which is the 5th largest jail system in the country. I was assistant to the commissioner. I was also nominated Employee of the Year in 2007. After that, I came back up to Massachusetts, where I was gubernatorial appointee to be Director of Research and Planning for the Massachusetts Department of Correction. Now, there's a lot of important work that needs to be done, and that's why I'm running. One of the things I learned when I was working in the Massachusetts Department of Correction is that we don't measure our programs to see if they work or not. And I have a problem with that. Those are your tax dollars and those are my tax dollars. And this is the situation that we have at city and state agencies all over Massachusetts. We don't actually measure whether or not our programs work to see if they actually deliver the outcomes we're looking for. And like I said, I have a problem with that. What we need to do is send somebody to Beacon Hill who knows the ins and outs of how to look for tax waste while maintaining the integrity of programs, because that's what our communities need, is to make sure that the vital services that they are the recipients of are not being negatively affected. Making sure what works and what doesn't is very important. Additionally, one of the things I've dedicated my campaign to talking about are mental health services. Whether you're a child with ADHD, which I worked with for 7 years, whether you're a returning veteran with PTSD or TBI, or whether you are a senior with Alzheimer's, that's very important for our community. Lastly, I have a lot of good jobs ideas. Stuff that's not my idea, but stuff that's been tested elsewhere. And, so I see the time's up, and I'll yield the mic.
Terrific, thank you both. We appreciate your respect for the time. Once again, we have Mr. Hand from the Sun Chronicle and Mr. Lang from the United Regional Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Hand will kick off round 2 with a question for Mr. Ross.
Representative Ross, good evening. I'd like to ask you about our state transportation system. As you know, it's billions and billions of dollars in debt. The MBTA raised fares 23% this year. They've already said they're coming back for more next year. So the question is, would you support an increase in the gasoline tax to help pay off some of this debt and get the transportation system straightened out?
Gee, Mr. Hand, I'm glad you asked that question. Recently, I signed a no new taxes pledge, like I did 2 years ago, and I will adhere to that. I helped in that bailout of the MBTA because it was going to cost a lot of good people hard-earned money to try to get to work. I honestly believe that it's the governor's responsibility to keep his department in check. If there are massive millions of dollars worth of money now that we find out that are missing, something's wrong there, and something has to be created, whether it's a blue ribbon committee or the Senate or in the House, to investigate that. Something is wrong at that department. And with them asking for money to expand the South Coast Rail, you're already billions of dollars in debt. What else can you hawk? You know, the cars are in disrepair, people complain. I had a lady call me in the middle of the summer when it was 90+ degrees that the AC wasn't working, and they have the audacity to want to increase fares. That's wrong. It's the governor's responsibility. They work for the governor, and the governor should fix this problem.
3 minutes, please.
Okay. The problem with the MBTA is one where the debt from the big dig has been dumped onto the MBTA and the department. What we need to do is find out a way that we can actually relieve the MBTA of some of that debt. Now, Mr. Ross just said that he was instrumental in keeping the fares down to 23% through his vote. However, what Mr. Ross did first was vote against that temporary relief the week of July 22nd, And that would have increased the fares to over 40% had his vote gone the way he intended it to. So Mr. Ross actually voted against MBTA funding for MBTA commuters before he voted for it. And I find that a little bit disturbing. Additionally, when I actually went ahead and said that I would take a travel stipend that representatives are given for traveling back and forth to Beacon Hill, I said I would donate that to MBTA commuters to offset some of the burden that they have, with the increase in fare. Mr. Ross called that charity. I don't think that's charity. I think that's giving back to the voters their tax dollars. But one thing that Mr. Ross also said about my proposal to give tax dollars back to the citizens of our community is that he's given a lot of charities as well. And Mr. Ross, I commend you for your donations to charities, but in the process of that, I've never once said I've never once mentioned a charity that I've given to. You did. The issue of the MBTA financing is one where we do need to find out how we can, keep costs down. Now, I don't think we need to raise taxes on this issue. We do not need to raise taxes on this issue. The reason for that is because we need to find out where we're wasting money first on programs that we're already paying for, and we need to reduce waste and inefficiencies there. This is the central issue of what I'm running on, to make sure we actually measure programs so we eliminate waste, fraud, abuse, make sure we're getting the outcomes we want. That's how we're going to go ahead and free up money to be able to pay for more essential programs such as the MBTA. Now, there's a lot to be said about the South Coast Rail and whether or not we're going to be able to afford that, because that's certainly on the horizon as well. Again, what we have to do is find out how much of a need we really have for that. I'm a big fan of public transportation, but if we're talking about raising taxes to pay for it, no, I don't support that.
Okay, Mr. Mike will have the next two questions. The first one for Mr. Heroux.
If elected, you will become or renew, when this comes to George, your status as a state official. But you're also a representative of the city, the people, and the businesses of Attleboro, which means you still have to work with the local elected officials and their staff. What kind of a relationship do you have with the local officials, and how will this affect your ability to get things done for your constituents here in Attleboro?
One of the advantages that I have is that I'm not a career politician, and we don't need any more career politicians. What we need is people who come from the community, who are going to represent our community, people who are not going to represent their political party. My opponent, Mr. Ross, has voted with the Republican Party over 98% of the time. What he ran on when he was running as a state rep or as an opponent 2 years ago is that he's going to be an independent voice. I'm sorry, but there is no such thing as an independent voice who, votes 98% of the time with the minority leadership, with the Republican leadership. What type of role would I have working with the Attleboro elected officials at present? Well, I'm like a regular citizen. I don't have much contact with the elected officials of Attleboro. There are a lot of people who don't know who to go to when they have a problem with their pothole. They don't know who to go to when they have a problem with the school system. I've been knocking on a lot of doors, and there have been a lot of people who, raised a lot of issues to me. And they say, I don't know who to go to. Every single door I knock on, I leave my home phone number to those folks, because it's the people that we need to represent more than any political party. Now, the idea that somebody who might be coming as an outsider to to work with a group of career politicians, and there are some new folks as well, that's what we really need to have. We need to get away from this notion that we need to have folks who are like living as a career in politics, and they're calling it public service, when what they might be more concerned about is, again, their political party and voting with that 98% of the time. So I look forward to working with the Attleboro City Council. I look forward to working with the mayor. In fact, come to think of it, I actually did work with the mayor and his administration when we were selling my mother's building, the Ashley building, which now houses Sangrias and Scorpios. So when you're working with a different group of folks, elected officials, effective leadership and effective representation is looking for good ideas. It's looking for, finding a common ground on something. What it's not looking to do is to, represent any one particular party. Public service is not about the Democratic Party, it's not about the Republican Party, it's about the people we're serving. And if you're working with the elected officials and you both have that goal in mind, finding, solutions is going to be pretty easy.
Paul, you talk about constituent services. I started constituent services 31 years ago as an appointed official and 7 terms as an elected official. That's all I ever did. I used to cruise my ward once a week with a big pad, marking down potholes, marking down problems with trees that are down. And I have an excellent working relationship with the Chamber of Commerce, of which I'm a proud member, and also with our city administration. I spent day after day this summer meeting with department heads, trying to find out some of their needs. I spent day after day in Boston meeting with DHCD to try to get rehab money for the elderly housing. It was a very interesting summer, and I was very, very busy. And I learned a lot, and I'm really proud of the things that I've done. You talk about constituent services. You promised constituent services. I've delivered constituent services.
Before we move to our next question, I have a request of the audience. If you could, please understand it's not easy to sit up here. These lights are very bright. I've got nothing at stake, and I find it difficult to sit up here. These gentlemen have quite a bit at stake. If the audience could refrain from speaking to each other while the candidates are speaking, or while anybody up here is speaking, it would be greatly appreciated. I think what you don't realize is you're not whispering as quietly as you think you are, and it's very distracting even from this distance. So if there's a way you could refrain from speaking while others are speaking up here, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Mr. Lang.
Gentlemen, what are your thoughts and where do you stand on the federal judge's decision to grant a sex change operation to a murderer?
Who's first?
Mr. Ross.
I think it's appalling, and I think it's a slap in the face to every taxpayer of this state. People are groveling to put food on their table. People can't even put gas in their cars. And we're going to give some convicted murderer a sex change operation. I don't care if some people think it's a violation of the 8th Amendment. I don't believe it is. I think providing basic medical care for prisoners is good enough. And I signed on to the letter, which Senator Timilty alluded to before, that we sent to the governor. And I'm very proud of that. I will not tolerate that. And I don't care what we have to do, but this just can't happen in this state. We're going to be the laughing stock of the country if we let this happen.
Well, I too opposed the sex offender change because it is basically something that is setting a really bad precedent. I was working as a director when I was in the Department of Correction, and this is one of the issues that we talked about at executive staff meetings, and we were really concerned it would be setting a bad precedent because, it's a slippery slope. What other medical needs are people going to be requesting? What other types of crimes are people going to commit just to end up in prison so they can get a particular type of medical treatment? Now, I'm glad that Representative Ross signed on to appeal the decision, and I'm glad that the governor is appealing the decision because I believe in the appeals process. Whether you get a parking ticket or you've been sentenced to the death penalty, something we don't have here in Massachusetts, the appeals process is a very important aspect of our judicial system. When the decision comes back, what I'm looking for is, are there a group of doctors who have a consensus that this is a medical necessity? Is it a medical necessity? I don't know. Me personally, I don't have the answer. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a lawyer. But if if the appeals process comes back and said, yes, this is a medical necessity, then so be it. If the appeal process comes back and said this isn't, well, then minimal medical treatment is exactly what the inmate deserves, according to the 8th Amendment. So yeah, to answer your question, I was opposed to an inmate receiving a $20,000 sex change operation. On the face of it, that sounds absolutely absurd. And I am glad the governor is appealing it, and I'm looking forward to finding out if a group of doctors have decided to, concur with the initial physician who said that this is a medical necessity. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but we should defer to the medical community for that.
Okay, Mr. Hand, last question from round 2, and first up will be Mr. Heroux.
Mr. Heroux, in recent days, abortion has suddenly become a big issue in the presidential campaign, but it's also a state issue. Several states in recent years have put more limits on abortion than existed in the past. What is your position on abortion, and what, if any, state restrictions would you support if you were elected?
I say if you're going to choose life. I do not like abortion. I hate abortion. Abortion is a really nasty thing, and it's an intensely, extremely personal decision that a woman is faced with in pretty uncomfortable circumstances. The pressure from that society puts on her own sense of what might be right or wrong is just extremely personal. Now, the way I look at abortion and avoiding it is, and that's what I'd like to do, is try and avoid it wherever we can, is to make sure we have a continuum of intervention. The first best way to avoid abortion is abstinence, period. That's the first best thing. When that fails, you have contraception. When that fails, you have adoption. When that fails, you finally have abortion. So there's a long list of different alternatives we can approach before we even have to, reach whether or not a woman has the right to abortion. Now let's talk about Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was about 2 different things, and that's what that is the heart of the abortion question. Roe v. Wade actually discusses 2 things. It has to do with the woman's right to privacy, as well as protecting the life of an unborn child. And that's why what Roe v. Wade says in the first trimester, that women are allowed to have abortion because the child is not able to live on its own. But in the 2nd and 3rd trimester has a lot of limitations. And so what this is a woman's privacy issue. Now, like I said, I hate abortion. I promise you I will never have one. But this is not my decision to make for another woman. I've had very intense discussions with my fiancé about this. We don't always see eye to eye on this issue. And, it is a very intense and very personal decision reserved for a woman. I will not legislate what a woman can and cannot do with her body. But like I said, if you're going to choose life. In terms of the restrictions placed on abortion going forward as a legislator, what I would want to do is carefully weigh the 2 things that Roe v. Wade talked about in its decision, which is the life of an unborn child and a woman's right to privacy, because it is a very tricky situation on where you're going to be deciding what elements to consider, where they consider at what point in the woman's pregnancy. So I've spent a lot of time investigating this issue because it is an extremely important issue to a lot of women. And I've been endorsed by the National Organization of Women because of my position on this, as well as Planned Parenthood. They really liked my approach that I took when I talked about a continuum and abstinence being first. With that, I'll turn it over to Ross.
I'm pro-life. I have an adopted daughter. If I believed in abortion, I wouldn't have that lovely girl today with her beautiful children and her wonderful husband. That's it.
And that's it for round 2. So we'll start round 3. And we're going to start with Mr. Ross asking Mr. Heroux a question. And again, I remind everybody that there's 3 minutes to answer and 2 minutes to respond. And we'll do this 4 times.
Paul, in 2011, the city council voted to ban level 2 and level 3 sex offenders from the library after an 8-year-old boy was assaulted in the library in New Bedford. You appeared before the city council to speak neither for or against this ordinance. Could you justify your position of not taking any position on an ordinance designed to protect our children and others from potentially harmful predators?
Mr. Ross, thank you very much for this question. You are right, and I appreciate your characterization that I did not take a position for or against that ordinance. That ordinance is useless. What that ordinance is talking about doing is banning level 2 and 3 sex offenders from going into public places where they'll be able to prey on children. Here's a fact. Sex offenders don't go to public places to prey on children. It's the individuals that exploit a trust with a family and with their, like in a school. It's the swim coach. These are the people, that's where sex offenders target. There was one particular example that makes my point of a child being assaulted in a New Bedford library 4 years ago, 40 miles away. Well, thank you for that pointing out that happened 1 year ago. I'm sorry, 4 years ago, 40 miles away. How many thousands of other kids have been victimized between that point in time and now? Now, I want every parent to listen very closely to the advice I have to give you. I was Director of Research for the Department of Correction. I was Assistant to the Commissioner of the Philadelphia Jail System. I have a master's in criminology. I've testified in federal court, and I've been on the radio talking about this issue. The best way for you to protect your kids against sex offenders, and this is for every parent, I hope every parent is watching this on TV too, is you need to talk to your kids about what constitutes appropriate touching and inappropriate touching. What constitutes crossing boundaries, and your kids have to know that you are safe to go to when the boundaries are crossed. Now, every parent needs to let their kid know that they will not get in trouble if they cross these boundaries. The parents are the first best line of defense against sexual predation, not some feel-good measure that the city council passed. Now, I challenge the city council to produce one shred of evidence that that ordinance was a good evidence-based measure. The city council did not contact the Mass Sex Offender Registry Board. I did. The city council did not contact the Mass Treatment Center for Sex Offenders. I did. The city council didn't know how many sex offenders were residing in Attleboro. I did. There are 90. At the time, there were 90. There were 17 level 3, and there were 73 level 2. The Massachusetts City Council did not know what the rate of recidivism was for sex offenders. The city council did absolutely no homework on this issue, and I find that extremely disturbing considering the severity of this issue. Parents are the first best line of defense, not some feel-good measure that the city council passed.
2 minutes, please.
I can't believe, Paul, that you don't think that our city council did a good job. I spoke with a lot of those people on that council, and they shared a lot of that information with me. And even if it saved one kid from being molested, it was worth it.
Okay, Mr. Heroux, you're up with your question, please.
Mr. Ross, the central theme of my campaign is reducing government waste. What I want to make sure we're doing is finding out where programs are ineffective and inefficient. How do we know whether or not our tax dollars are being used wisely or not? This is the central aspect of what I'm running on. It's what I do as a professional in the private sector, as a consultant. It's what I've been employed to do in a city agency and a state agency. Would you please tell for me and the audience how you know whether or not a program is actually wasting tax dollars or not? What metrics do you use? What have you done about programs that are wasting money? And how would you go forward to reduce further government waste of tax dollars?
Well, Paul, I've got to tell you, I think you're confused. You either want to be a legislator or an analyst. You got to pick. You got to pick and choose. because I don't get paid to be an analyst. I get paid to be a legislator. And we have people in government that are paid to send us reports, to let us know if these programs are working. You can't do it all. You won't have the time to do it all. Make up your mind.
Mr. Ross, thank you for explaining to the audience that you have absolutely no idea how to determine whether or not we're wasting government dollars. Now, the job of a legislator is to analyze legislation. And I was the director of research for a $500 million state agency. I will tell you for a fact, we have no idea whether or not our programs are reducing recidivism or not. That is a fact. I was director of research and planning for the Mass Department of Correction. I was the person that was trying to put out the reports. I was blocked from that. I had a real problem with that, and that's why I'm running for a state rep. Because what we can do is we can attach performance measures to all of our spending bills to determine whether or not programs are operating effectively and efficiently, whether or not the drug treatment program actually keeps people off drugs or not, whether or not the job placement program actually puts people in a job at a higher rate than somebody who doesn't actually, participate in a program. You just demonstrated that you have absolutely no idea what reports come out of the state agencies, because there is no state agency that produces an outcome report. What we have now are different state agencies that have research divisions and performance measures divisions, but what they do is called output reports. They count how many inmates they're serving, they count how many people, how many clients they're servicing, they count the trends that are going on within the state agencies, but what they do not do, and what I have a real problem with, is they do not measure whether or not our tax dollars are being wasted. Now, I probably don't sound like a typical Democrat when I say that, but that's because this isn't a Democratic issue and this isn't a Republican issue. This is just a good government issue. If we actually attach performance measures to our spending bills, we will get some type of, some type of answer on these questions. And for the programs that we already have, we can mandate reports. There were reports I was required to submit as the director of research that would answer these questions if they had been legislated.
Okay. Mr. Ross, next question, please.
Okay, Paul, voting records are a matter of public record. Campaign 101 states that you should research and know your opponent. Why did you think this common and accepted practice would be considered dirty politics?
Well, George, I thought you were setting the standard of a clean campaign, and there's only one thing you could use with a election record, and that's to throw dirt at somebody who doesn't have a voting record. Excuse me, misspoke. A voting record. The fact of the matter is I voted in 2004, 2008, 2010, 2011, 2012, twice, and I will be voting a third time. Am I a perfect voter? No. Am I a regular voter? Yes. And I think that the average person can probably identify with that. Now, I spent a lot of time away from Massachusetts, and I didn't even understand the absentee ballot system. I've lived in Saudi Arabia, I've lived in London, I've lived in Philadelphia, I've lived in Los Angeles, and so there were times I was away. And I would, highly suggest that the likelihood of, a college student, not voting because they don't understand the absentee process is, is probably pretty probable. And, when I was, working down in the Philadelphia jail system, there was a, election in 2006. That's right, I did not come back to Massachusetts, where I've been a resident my entire life. I've maintained my residency here. I didn't come back to vote for that election. But a very dear friend of mine, he's like a brother to me. He's a local veterans rep of a particular community that's bordering Attleboro. I had a conversation with him about this the other day. He served 9 years in the Marine Corps. He told me he only votes in presidential elections. He doesn't vote in local elections. So the idea that, it's a slap on the face of, to veterans for, voting sometimes, yes, sometimes, I mean, if you want to talk about voting records, let's talk about the time you voted against local aid twice. If you want to talk about records, I mean, let's go there.
Okay, let's go there, buddy. You should be ashamed of yourself, Paul. You voted 4 times since 1995. And in your patch article, you made the statement, which I think is flippant and irresponsible, that nothing piqued your interest that year. What about all the thousands of veterans you insulted in this city that laid down their lives and put their lives in jeopardy so that you could have that opportunity? And you cast it off with some flippant remark. I think you owe every veteran in this city an apology. And if veterans don't understand that, there's something wrong with you, because we all took a pledge to support and serve this country as members of the armed services. And you can go ahead and boo, but the people who are booing really don't care about this country.
Okay. If you could, please, respect for both candidates. Okay, let's go on to our next question. Mr. Heroux.
Actually didn't know what we could bring notes up here, so I forgot what my next question was. So, Mr. Ross, you campaigned 2 years ago on the notion of bringing jobs to Attleboro. Now, what the question I'm about to ask is, with the knowledge that you never once testified before the House on a single jobs bill. In fact, the first time you testified in Beacon Hill, you gave your maiden speech, I believe it was on July 26th, 5 days before the end of your second legislative session. Now, my question is, what jobs have you brought to Attleboro? You campaigned on bringing jobs to Attleboro. What jobs did you bring to Attleboro?
The GOP caucus sponsored a jobs tour. And in fact, it was right in this school. And we had employers as well as employees that came out to talk about how they thought that things could be improved. And we garnered a lot of information from those testimonies. And the other portion of this idea goes to the Gateway Cities plan. We got the Gateway Cities program passed unanimously through the House and also passed in the Senate, and it was vetoed by your governor. That vetoing, with that one stroke of the pen, eliminated what could have been thousands of jobs. Representative Emporia and myself met with principals of many large companies, one of them being the Warren Buffett Company, and they were willing to come here and relocate jobs from Florida, New York, and Rhode Island. But no one in the state would cooperate with them. No one in the state would extend to them extra tax breaks to come here. And we know of 700 jobs that would have hit the deck right off the bat. And then all the surrounding jobs, the support jobs that could have gone with it. We're trying. We try every day. Every person we meet with. We meet with the Chamber of Commerce. And people think it's funny because we go to ribbon cuttings. We go there to give those people some confidence and thank them for their investment in this city. And that's important if we honor them with a certificate. It may not seem much to you, but it means the world to them. I know what it's like to be a small businessman and be in trouble. And I know what it's like to have to pay employees and sign the front of a check. And sometimes there's not enough to bring home. So you just have to toughen it out. But there are a lot of people struggling like that in this city. And we've got to try to help them out. I can't tell you how many jobs I brought. I didn't keep track of it. All I know is the unemployment rate went down in the last 2 years in Attleboro. Not by much. It can come a lot better, but it did come down.
Now, my opponent in his response failed to identify a single job he brought to Attleboro. The jobs tour that the Republicans took, was, a good idea, but what I'm looking for is a sense of leadership. What did you actually do to fight for jobs in Attleboro? Mr. Ross, you never once testified before the House on the jobs. Your first testimony was on bath salts, and that was on July 26th. You never once testified about jobs. They were, I don't even know where to begin. With the gateway cities, you've contacted the Sun Chronicle 2 days after my Democratic opponent in the primary, Steve Kane, wrote a letter to the editor just talking about, how Steve Kane was talking about how he was going to file for gateway cities. 2 days later, you contacted Sun Chronicle, or at least there was an article in there. Over the course of 2 days, you didn't understand that Attleboro is not a gateway city. The governor vetoed the gateway cities because there was no funding mechanism for it. You didn't have any way of paying for the $30 million that would have come to Attleboro. You voted against a $45 million local aid for cities and towns all over Massachusetts, including money that was federal money that would have come to Attleboro. You voted against that, lockstep with the Republican Party, but in citing that there was no way to pay for it, but then you had no way to pay for the Gateway Cities program. Of course the governor's going to veto that. Now, if I were a state rep, when I'm state rep, what I would do is I would continue to push for ways that we could find Attleboro to become the 25th gateway city. Attleboro could stand to benefit from a lot of the tax breaks that it can't afford on its own. Now, in Mr. Ross's response, he campaigned on bringing jobs to Attleboro. He did not bring any jobs to Attleboro. He's not an effective legislator.
Okay, so we're at closing remarks, and I'll again reiterate the request they each have 3 minutes to wrap up. There's got to be a way to respectfully not talk during the next 6 minutes, if you could, please. Mr. Ross, you're up first.
Thank you. In closing, while the past 2 years have been extremely successful, much work remains. I still have many pieces of business that need to be addressed. It is critical that I continue to advocate for Attleboro to be a gateway city because of the potential for thousands of jobs that could bring to our local economy. I will propose legislation that would lighten the load for small businesses and offer generous tax breaks for new startup businesses and low-interest loans for those businesses who would like to expand. It's no surprise that small businesses provide many jobs for our local citizens and are the backbone of the Massachusetts economy. I will work closely with all agencies, public and private, that seek to bring jobs to Attleboro. I will introduce legislation to protect our veterans and nonprofit organizations from companies that seek donations in their name by maximizing the percentage of the donations that benefits the organization. It is also imperative that we continue to protect and provide for our seniors, and we cannot forget our obligation to provide the best education for the children of Attleboro. I'm asking you, the citizens of the city, to vote for me because I truly care about the lives and fortunes of the people in this city. I have the experience, the background, and the sincerity to continue to be your state representative. You've had the chance to hear from both candidates. Now, through the power of your vote, you will be able to choose your voice on Beacon Hill. I will continue to be an advocate for Attleboro. I love this city, and I'm committed to serving you and to helping our community thrive. It takes a sincere commitment to be part of the fabric of the community, and I think with my 31-year involvement, I think that proved that to you all. Please give me the opportunity once again to represent you and cast your ballot on November 6th for me, George T. Ross, your state representative.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank, first and foremost, Mr. Ross for agreeing to this debate with me, and I'm really thankful for the Regional Chamber of Commerce and the Sun Chronicle for hosting this debate. I think Mr. Ross's presence here today is a testimony that I've run a clean campaign, because he said he wouldn't debate me if I ran a dirty campaign. So I'm glad that this is cleared now. Now, the big issue that I'm running on is one of representation. And one of the things that we need to keep our eye on the ball with is that public service is not about those who serve. Public service is about those who would be served. There's a lot of important work that needs to be done here in this community and across our state. There's a lot of programs that we don't know if they're operating, if they're delivering the effective services that we all depend on and we require. What we need to do is make sure the government we're operating looks at itself before it starts being critical of its citizens. Now, when I've gone around door to door, I've knocked on thousands of doors. And this one message, as I talk to folks day in, day out, they always wonder, is he a Republican or is he a Democrat? I get that people at 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour into a conversation, they ask, what are you? That happens over and over again. That's because I'm not running for the Democratic Party and I'm not running against the Republican Party. I'm not running against the incumbent. I'm running for the people of this community. Now, Mr. Ross has got 31 years of public service experience, and I commend him for that. I think that's very honorable. I wish I could have 31 years of public service experience myself, but my mom wouldn't let me out when I was only 5 years old to begin that. So the matter is that there are sick families, there are families who are struggling, we have parents who are dying, we have resources being wasted all over this community, all over our state, and what we need is someone who's going to fight for those families, and that's why I'm running. It's about doing more for others than you would do for yourself. That's the spirit of public service. I'm getting into public service at this level, not because it's new to me. I served at our local YMCA with children and families for 7 years. Some of that was part-time, some of it was full-time. I served in jail. I better choose my words carefully. I worked for a jail, and I worked for a prison. That was public service as well, making sure your tax dollars aren't being wasted. That's the central issue of this campaign. A good state rep is going to be a steward of your tax dollars, and that is the chief goal that I would like to bring with me to Beacon Hill. So with that, I'd like to thank Mr. Ross again for participating in this debate, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Sun Chronicle. I look forward to November 6th, and please vote for me, Paul Heroux, for your next state representative. Thank you.
And many thanks to the candidates, the panelists, our fearless timekeeper, all the volunteers here tonight, a bunch of folks behind cameras, and everybody else for coming out. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Good job.